If you are familiar with Ferdinand Magellan, you are likely also familiar with his 1521 voyage to the Philippines. That was the first time the locals encountered him and the Spaniards. But wait, for those of you who may not know, this was not the first time the Filipinos encountered Ferdinand Magellan. Of course, they were not called Filipinos back then, and the islands were not yet named the Philippines. So, we all know Magellan as the man whose expedition completed the first trip around the world, but he himself never finished that journey. He died on a Philippine beach in the Battle of Mactan while fighting the forces of local leader Lapu-Lapu. So, yes, his name is in the history books, but his story is deeply connected to people in this region long before 1521. 10 years before Magellan ever came close to the islands we now call the Philippines, he had already entered a world where people from Luzon were active and powerful. Most of us were taught that the story of the Philippines and the West starts in 1521 when Magellan discovered the islands. But if we rewind to the year 1511, the story opens somewhere else entirely, in a city called Malacca. At the time, Malacca was one of the busiest ports on earth. It sat on a narrow strait that connected the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea, and it became a choke point for the spice trade between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. A Portuguese writer named Tomé Pires described the importance of the city by saying that whoever controlled Malacca could squeeze the flow of wealth to European cities like Venice. Magellan was in Malacca as a young soldier fighting under the Portuguese General Afonso de Albuquerque during the city's violent invasion. When the Portuguese stormed Malacca, they did not just meet local Malays. They noticed a community of traders and sailors they called the Luzones. These people came from the island of Luzon, and they were not just visitors. They were already part of the system. They owned ships, joined trade voyages, and participated in the port's commercial and political life. Portuguese reports described them as skilled merchants who knew the routes across Southeast Asia and into China. This shows us that people from Luzon were already moving across borders and seas long before Spain ever planted a flag in the archipelago. In Malacca, the Luzones were known enough to be listed as a distinct group among the many communities living and working in the city. Some modern historians argue that certain Luzon leaders there even held positions that looked very much like official posts or trusted roles under new Portuguese rulers. One figure is often mentioned with a Portuguese-style name like Regimo de Raja. His exact job title is debated, but the picture that emerges is of a Luzon leader who mattered. He was someone that Portuguese had to deal with when they wanted to secure their control over this crucial trading port. This suggests that people from Luzon were not weak outsiders because they had real influence inside one of the richest cities of the region. This flips the usual classroom story. Many of us grew up with the idea that people in the pre-colonial Philippines were isolated or simple and just waiting to be discovered by Europeans. But the evidence from Malacca tells a different story. The Luzones were already plugged into a huge Asian trade network. They sailed across dangerous waters, ran businesses in foreign cities, and handled deals involving valuable goods. Sources on the region mentioned that goods such as gold and wax from the north were exchanged for silk, porcelain, and weapons from other lands. The Portuguese were even surprised by the quality of the small bronze cannons used in the area, often called lantaca. These were serious weapons cast and used by local powers long before European empires arrived in full force. Now, let us bring in one of the most interesting characters linked to both Malacca and Magellan, a man history remembers as Enrique of Malacca. During the events around 1511, Magellan acquired a young man there as a personal servant. Because he was bought in Malacca and spoke the local language, many accounts assume he was Malay. But later events raised a big question. In 1521, when Magellan's fleet finally reached the islands near Cebu, Enrique was suddenly able to speak with the local people. He could understand their speech and they could understand him. For some historians, this is a strong clue that Enrique might not have been originally from Malacca at all. Instead, they argue that he could have been a person from the Philippine region who had been taken to Malacca before Magellan ever met him. If Enrique's true home was somewhere in the Philippine Islands, then his life path changes how we see first circumnavigation of the globe. Think about his journey. He started in Southeast Asia, was taken west to Malacca, then further west to Europe with Magellan, and then sailed from Europe back across the Atlantic and the Pacific. That is almost a full circle around the planet. Some modern writers argue that this would make Enrique the first person to have circumnavigated the world. Even though his exact origin remains unproven, his story reminds us that people from this region were not just background characters. They were interpreters, guides, and key connectors between cultures. When we put all these pieces together, a new image appears. Long before Spanish rules, the island we now call the Philippines were woven into a wide and complex trade web. Magellan did not sail into an empty, quiet ocean and find a place that had been waiting for him. He arrived in a region where traders from Luzon had been active and where local leaders like Lapu-Lapu were ready to defend their shores. This is why the Malacca story matters so much. In 1511, a young Magellan walked the streets of cities across Asia, including Luzon traders. He saw for himself how rich and connected the East already was. The Filipino story does not begin with being discovered. It begins with being present. It begins with people who crossed seas and built networks even before European maps caught up. When we talk about Magellan, Enrique, and the Luzones, we are not just retelling a tale about a famous voyage. We are recovering the role of a people who were already global and already making their mark on history, long before anyone planted a European flag on their shores.